All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker who, in this context, really should need no introduction. He is the creator of Direct Instruction, DI, the senior author of the DI programs, and the founder of NIFTY, the National Institute for Direct Instruction, as well as being professor of education at the University of Oregon. In addition to the numerous curricula that he has published and authored, he is the author of a wide variety of articles and books on education. Some of these are of a very highly technical nature, such as conceptual learning, the theory of instruction. Some of his other publications are very accessible, but no less insightful and powerful. One of these is Preventing Failure in the Primary Grades, and then there's this one, which I call the DI Implementer's Bible. And if you've never seen this or read this, I really entreat you to do so. It's called Successful and Confident Students with Direct Instruction. If you haven't seen Zig before, we have a variety of different videos on our website in which he talks about different aspects of teaching and learning. One of my favorites is the 1966 black and white video demonstration of preschoolers that he worked with just for a summer or two. This is back at the University of Illinois. And if you haven't seen that, it's absolutely amazing what he was able to do with those preschoolers and the math they demonstrate. You just can't believe that they only got that amount of instruction, they're that young. Today he's going to talk with us about maximizing student performance with DI. So please help welcome up the Dean of Direct Instruction and my father, Professor Zig Engelmann.
First try. That's a first. I mean, my record before was third try I could do it. Badee.
That's all, folks.
No, this is just the beginning. Yes. Wow. You're a good group. This conference has been around for, how do I get that slide up, or do I? Oh. This conference has been around for 43 years. I was 11 years old at the first one. It prepares educators to maximize student achievement through direct instruction. And the direct instruction is a different technology. It is based largely on data. How many trials does it take to teach something? I don't know. Let's get some kids and find out. And then after you find out, then you might be in a position to write a program in which you provide the adequate amount of instruction that is needed for them to learn the different things they're supposed to learn. And that's how we did it. We didn't start with programs. We started working with kids, seeing what they could learn, seeing how many trials it took to teach them different things, and then designing programs accordingly so that they met these specifications and made it possible for someone to know very little about the kids and teaching them, knowing only how to follow the script and present tasks properly. And if you know how to present them properly and know how to correct mistakes efficiently and move on, you have the skills needed to present the program in a way that kids will learn. You'll teach them. It'll happen. And it's really great when it does happen. I mean, I think it's one of the most rewarding activities anybody could have. So this conference has been around for 43 years, and it prepares educators to maximize student achievement through direct instruction. Next slide. Do I do that, or does it happen automatically? Oh, that's a hell of a deal. And then a great wave came forth. Maximizing student achievement in DI program involves several things. The first is placing students in the appropriate level of the program. That seems like almost brain dead, and you shouldn't have to say it. You not only have to say it, you have to make sure it happens. Or you'll find people putting kids in the program who no way have the prerequisite skills needed for that program. Or you'll find them dinking around with someone who's got a lot of smarts and can learn a lot of things and could be placed in a higher level of the program, in a low level of the program. So it's not a brain dead issue. It is very important. And you have to start with the appropriate level, and then you have to place them in that appropriate level. And then number two, you have to teach them to mastery once in a while. No, every day. It's not good enough to, get on their case one day and, really go around and around the bush a few times and get it at mastery, and then the next day kind of slide over. No, you have to go around that bush again. And you've got to really, really stoke it up. But that doesn't mean you make it negative. You're not punishing them. You're not expecting them to learn in fewer trials than it takes them to learn. You're not scolding them or in any way suggesting that they are at fault. They're not at fault. They're trying hard. And if they're trying hard, you're reinforcing the hell out of them. I mean, it's a real simple formula. Are they trying? Reinforce them. They're not getting it? They'll get it. I mean, just be patient. And don't show them you're impatient. And don't suggest that they are not learning as fast as they should. They're learning as fast as they can. And a lot of teachers don't get this, and they start tisking the kids. And the basic rule about that is don't tisk. It's not a good practice. But you want to place them in the appropriate level of the program. That means they don't know the stuff, but they have the prerequisite skills necessary to be in the program. And most all of the programs have placement tests that take these criteria and translate them into what? 3? Oh, number 3. I wasn't looking at the screen. Shame on me. I'll have to start over. Okay. Teaching them to mastery every day, we got that. 3, providing sufficient schedules for the DI program. That means that you don't just do them once in a while. You do them every day, and you do them continuously. So the kids get into the routine, and you get into the routine, and it goes on, and the longer it goes, the better it gets. I mean, because the kids learn the game, and they become better students, they become great students, and you become proficient. And oh, look at that, 4. celebrate student success. What does that mean? That means you want to let them know how absolutely elated you are that they learned something. You want to show them, and they can feel it. They're elated. If it's something that has been advertised as being very difficult, that only some kids learn, and they've learned it, do you think they feel pretty good about themselves? Yeah. And you don't have to do much to move in on that feeling, to let them know, yeah, that's how I feel too. You're great. You started out, you couldn't do any of this stuff. And in fact, when I used to work with kids, I frequently tell them, do you remember when we first started this book and the things you were doing? There, let me go back to the beginning. Look at that. Did you have trouble with it? Yes. And look at what you're doing now. Are you amazing or what? Here, let me see. Stand up, sit down. Yeah, you're taller than you were. Here we go. Okay, but you want to celebrate student success. And if you have all four of these elements in place, you have a program that makes it possible for student growth to be dramatic. I mean, it just goes day by day in terms of what you're doing, but in terms of what they're doing, they are learning, extensive cognitive processing. And if you were to analyze the difficulty of some of the things they're learning, given that they couldn't do it, which is the case when you deal with low-performing kids, that it requires a lot of learning. I mean, it is not something that is simple to learn. Okay. What if these elements aren't in place? Varying degrees of disaster. No, I mean, and the kids may still look okay and have fun, and there may be some good things to say about it, but not from a central instructional viewpoint. Students not placed appropriately are over their head or bored and are not learning one way or another. I mean, they're not benefiting much from the instruction, and the instruction should be changed. Next, 2. Students not brought to mastery require constant correction. And the reason is they're not at mastery. And and the simplest way is to go back to a level at which you can teach them to mastery. And start there, even if you have to go back 60 lessons. What difference does it make? Go back, do it, bring them to mastery, let them know what mastery feels like, let them flourish on it, and then come on, let's go back through that. Now we're going through this like a football team down the field. Here we go. It's going fast, it's going great, everybody's with us. Hot damn. No, it's a wonderful sensation. What if these elements aren't in place, students not placed appropriately, are bored or not learning? Students not brought to mastery require constant corrections, no good, no good, no good. And 3, students who receive insufficient time in DI programs make unacceptable progress. I mean, you're not doing the program. Next, 4, students whose success are not celebrated will not have a clear idea about what's important and how they should perform. I mean, your celebrations tell them a lot. They tell them, I'm tickled pink with what you're doing. And if you don't celebrate something, and if you don't teach it, that's bad. If you don't celebrate it, that's bad. because the kids don't really have a good idea of what your yardstick is, what they need to do to please you. And they want to please you. Oh boy, do they want to please you. If you're their teachers and you let them know that you are the teacher, they're crazy to work with you. I mean, they like it. To help you get these elements in place, the trainers at this conference will prepare you to do different things. 1, present tasks fluently. 2, pause to provide think time. That doesn't seem like anything very important. Like hell. No, it's extremely important that you have pauses in appropriate places and give kids adequate amount of time to think about a response. Like, okay, 30 plus 50, everybody, what's the answer? A little too fast. 30 plus 50. Wait for the signal. Let's start over. 30 plus 50. Wait. What's the answer? 8. All right. Hell of a response. And then we can speed it up, once we get the routine and we get our timing down together. Okay. You want to present tasks fluently, pause to provide think time, signal students to respond orally, and if you get good at that, you're going to have a good time teaching, and also reinforce students for responding appropriately, or correct student errors. Okay? For participants who are new to DI, teaching this way may seem strange. Teaching this way may seem strange. Teaching this way may seem strange. Right on. But it's not. I mean, it's not conventional. But once you get into it, even if you're pretty sophisticated, and if the teacher has got good pacing and presents things, like where you got change-ups, you got things you like to do. It's not just all grind. There are particular tasks you like a lot. And, after you do some of these boring things, then the teacher can lay one of those on you and you like it a lot. And the lesson moves on. So, for participants who are new to DI, it may seem strange, and you have to, let's face it, you have to practice to become fluent in presenting lessons and correcting errors. It doesn't happen right away. And after a while, you'll go look back on the way you taught things when you first started and kind of shake your head. But don't be unkind to yourself. It requires a lot of new learning and pausing where you don't feel like you should pause. But the kids need that. Well, and often you don't pause because the kids go off and their behavior starts erupting. So all that means is you have to practice pausing with them so they understand what goes on during a pause. And you set it up so that they got to reinforce it. Okay, everybody who does this right gets the equivalent of 2 jelly beans. I'm going to have you pause. If you can pause quietly, then you're going to get jelly beans. Everybody, what's your name? What school is this? Pause. Oh, wow. Were you good? I don't have enough jelly beans for everyone. That was great. But that's what you want them to do. Have them get good at it. The idea of you orchestrating them. And that's what it is. I mean, you are teaching them just as you would if they were doing musical instrument or something that is what complex vocal activities. Well, that's what it is. Complex vocal activities. So if you put that on it, then you can see why it should be celebrated, why it's hard for a lot of them, why it requires practice and review, and why they'll feel real good about themselves if they know that, wow, you are impressed with it. Oh, your responses are so important in terms of determining how they're going to react. Mastering DI is worth the time and effort. I think that's true. That's what it's all about, making sure that all kids learn what they need to learn to be successful in school and in life. And if that sounds like just a slogan, it's really not. Because kids who learn these skills learn how to follow your direction, learn how to be quiet when they're supposed to be quiet, respond when they're supposed to respond, and learn these things, and who receive praise for doing it well and continue to do it well are going to be successful in school and in life. I mean, this carries over everywhere. Even if you get later on grumpy teachers who don't say squat, who don't overtly reinforce you, and who don't seem to have the person skills, like you will prevail because you will have the skills needed to prevail. And that's what it's all about, that we can't control their future, but we can certainly set it up so that they receive good models in like what teaching is, and they understand what the reception end of teaching is all about, learning, and they're good learners, and they know they're good learners because of their performance and because of your responses to their performance. And don't even question it for a minute. Your responses to what they're doing is as important as what they're doing. And that's it.
Thanks, Zig. Thank you very much. So I'd like to introduce our second keynote speaker. Robert Pondiscio is Senior Fellow and Vice President for External Affairs at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. He is also a Senior Advisor to the Democracy Prep Public Schools, a network of high-performing charter schools based in Harlem, New York. He writes and speaks extensively on education and education reform issues with an emphasis on literacy, curriculum, teaching, and urban education. After 20 years in journalism, including senior positions at Time and Business Week, Robert became a fifth grade teacher at a struggling South Bronx public school in 2002. He subsequently served as vice president of the Core Knowledge Foundation. Robert's articles and op-ed columns on education have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, the New York Daily News, Education Next, and many other publications. A frequent speaker and expert guest on educational issues, he's appeared on the Fox News Channel, CNN, and elsewhere. I'd like to thank Marcy Stein for introducing Nifty to Robert, and I take great pleasure in introducing him to you all now. Robert?
You'll let me know in about a half an hour whether I qualify as expert in anything. Is this not, I can use my teacher voice. And my last name indicates I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands and I hit things. Good morning, and I need to cue up my presentation. Bear with me one moment. Uh-oh, this doesn't look good. Yeah, you don't want to hear me winging it for half an hour. Uh-oh. There will be a quiz. Hey, there we go. Okay, well, that's sort of it, but let's just get started. Good morning, I'm Robert Pondiscio. Suppose your child was sick with a stomach cramp, high fever. Now suppose you take your child to the pediatrician's office, and what after examining your child, your pediatrician, you saw him or her go off to the corner, go on the laptop and start Googling treatment for stomach cramps and fever. Okay, your eyebrows would go up. Then after Googling remedies, instead of writing you a prescription to go to the pharmacy to get medicine, you saw your doctor, your pediatrician, working over the sink in his or her office and home brewing a remedy for you. What would you do? Well, I know what I would do. I would look for a new pediatrician. You would as well. Well, we're laughing, but think about what we do as teachers. Where do we get our instructional materials? I won't bore you with, well, you can't see this chart because of the aspect ratio, but you may know this. There was a recent study from the RAND Corporation, which found that nearly every teacher in America, that means all of us in this room, 99% of elementary school teachers, 96% of secondary school teachers, draws upon, quote, materials I developed or selected myself in teaching English language arts, virtually the same for math. Where do we find those materials? Well, the most common answer is Google. Number two, Google was 94%. Number two is Pinterest. Well done, 87%. But don't blame teachers. These data, for reasons both good and bad, I think reveal a dirty little secret about American education. In many districts, probably most districts and schools, the efficacy of instructional materials that we put in front of children is an afterthought. For teachers, it makes our jobs, which are already difficult, almost impossible to do well. We're not given the basic tools that we need to succeed. Now, my dad spent most of his life as a mechanic. He owned a lot of his own tools, but he did not make his own tools. But that's what we're doing, right? When we go on Google and Pinterest, we are looking online for lesson plans, for instructional materials. We're pulling together the basic tools of our profession to put in front of children. Who else does this? What other field refuses to provide its professionals with the basic materials they need to do their jobs? Thank you. Nobody tells a doctor, well, you're the best person to know what every child needs, so you should make your own medicine. When I was a first-year teacher, my classroom in the South Bronx was sloppy with people who wanted to tell me how to teach. When I asked what I thought was the very sensible question, well, what should I teach? My AP, my special ed supervisor, every adult in the room would say, oh, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. I just got here. How can that be possible? But actors perform in plays. They do not write their plays. If you hire a contractor to build your home, I promise you that he is not going to start his day with a chainsaw in his hand in the forest. He's going to go to the lumber yard. But for some reason, we expect teachers to be both instructional deliverers, experts, and expert instructional designers. Then add to that the expectation that we're going to differentiate instruction for every single kid in our room, and the job quickly becomes undoable by the 3.7 million mere mortals that we have in our classroom, myself included. And even worse than that, we valorize this, right? the lack of training, the struggles that we have as new teachers, it's a hazing ritual. We're kind of proud of it. It's how we earn our stripes as teachers. We tell war stories to new teachers if we survive the first few years. Like, let me tell you when I was a new teacher kid. Or we say, you know, there's just some things you're going to have to figure out for yourself. This is lunacy. Would you tell a new air traffic controller, well, look, everyone crashes a plane. You're new. You don't tell a rookie cop, look, you think you're the first new cop to shoot an innocent suspect? It'll get better. You know, is it any wonder that teachers are frustrated and exhausted? We've made this job almost impossible to do. By the way, I wrote a column last year for EdNext and US News where I made this point, and thank you for your agreement. And I expected, frankly, some pushback from a lot of teachers to say, wait a minute, you're trying to steal my autonomy. The opposite happened. The general reaction was, thank God someone is finally saying this, and it was the most widely read and shared piece on Education Next last year. So how did this happen? How did we get to the point where the basic job description of teaching is to be both expert curriculum deliverer and creator? Well, it happened, I think, this is just not going to work, because I think the curriculum is the red-headed stepchild of American education. It's an afterthought. We barely think about it. Or worse, we think it just doesn't matter. It matters, right? It matters a lot, and obviously by the fact that you came to this conference, you believe that it matters a lot too. So if it's so obvious to all of us as teachers that curriculum is at the heart of what we do, why is this nowhere near the center of our efforts nationally to improve outcomes for kids? I work in an education policy think tank. Don't hate me. When policymakers think about improving schools, what do they think about? Well, they think about things like this. Teacher pay and teacher quality, testing, accountability, standards, per pupil funding, class pay, class size, merit pay, on and on and on, tenure reform. Do you notice a pattern here? What are policymakers not thinking about? Hey, what are the kids doing all day? What are you teaching them? It's as if what happens inside of a classroom doesn't matter. When policymakers, elected officials, economists, whomever, are looking at what we do, they kind of regard the classroom as a black box. They don't peer inside of it. They measure what comes out of it. They think that all they need to do is measure what comes out of it. And then if the teacher's getting a good result, well, then we know that's a good teacher. Pay that teacher more. If it's a charter network and they're getting good results, give them more schools to open. If they're not, then let's shut them down. We just remain bizarrely incurious about why we're getting those good or bad results. You know, we seem stuck on the notion that good teaching is about who the teacher is, not what the teacher does. Here's an example, by the way, of just how crazy this is. A gentleman I know, a USC professor named Morgan Polikoff, about a year or so ago, wanted to do a study about textbooks and their efficacy in 4 different states. So he had to file, I'm not making this up, hundreds and hundreds of freedom of information requests in 4 different states simply to find out what textbooks were in schools. Now, this was not a conspiracy. It was not a grand, secret that anybody was trying to keep. It's just nobody had ever asked. Nobody had ever thought this was important enough to record. So we actually had to get the high schools in 4 different states to tell them what textbooks they were using. Now, look, I don't want to stand here and use my time complaining, because I actually come bearing good news. For the first time in my career, I actually think this is starting to change. I mean it earnestly. I believe that we're starting to see some curiosity about curriculum and about what happens inside of classrooms. Frankly, it could be because everything else has just not borne enough fruit. I'm reminded of what Winston Churchill said. He said the Americans can always be counted upon to do the right thing after exhausting all the other options. So we're finally getting to curriculum. So let me start by telling you a little bit about a research report that I commissioned. I have a small organization that I started with Lisa Hansel, with E.D. Hirsch, with Joel Klein, and some others called the Knowledge Matters Campaign. So I want to tell you about some research that we've done there. Then I want to, if time permits, spend a few minutes talking about the need for content-rich curriculum to build literacy. I know Dr. Stein is planning on addressing these issues in her session as well, so if the time runs out on me, we'll hear it from her. But let's just start by taking a look at curriculum effects. We've known for a while that curriculum effects on student learning are pretty substantial. Russ Whitehurst and Matt Chingos of Brookings published a paper nearly 10 years ago now that documented the effect sizes of good curricula versus bad curricula. What's interesting is that curriculum effect sizes have been demonstrated to dwarf some of these other things that policymakers spend their time looking at. So in other words, effect sizes for curriculum bigger than charter schools, bigger than early childhood education, bigger than Teach for America. Not to say those things don't matter. I teach at a charter school, I like TFA just fine, but what this tells us is that our curriculum choices matter. And by the way, it's a lot easier, is it not, to switch curriculum than to switch teachers. Cheaper. It's cost neutral. You've got to teach something. And it stands to reason that every teacher will be better if you give them better tools, a better curriculum. So it's encouraging that research is telling us what our own common sense and our own two eyes see, that curriculum matters. But there's a lot we do not know. Which curriculum is best? Do some work better than others? What are the features of a good curriculum that make it more or less effective? So we're starting to, again, pry open that black box and look at some of these questions. So to answer this, we started with a research review, which is what good academics do. We hired David Steiner, who's the head of the Education Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University and a former state ed commissioner in the state of New York, to basically do an analysis of all the curriculum research that exists. It's a massive document. I will not bore you by going through it. If you'd like to see it, it's available online through the Knowledge Matters campaign, or just email me and I'll send it to you. But let me share with you some of the major findings. Curriculum has, we mentioned the first one, the curriculum has been demonstrated to be a critical factor in student success. The cumulative effect of high quality curriculum is significant. One of the limitations of curriculum research, what little there is of it, is that most research studies look at the impact over a year or two. But over time, even a small effect size bears fruit. So in other words, if you had an effect size of, say, 0.10 standard deviations, that becomes a 0.60 effect size by the end of 5th grade. That's the equivalent of moving a child from the 50th percentile to the 74th percentile. That's a big effect. The next one gets to the heart of what I believe to be among the most serious problems that we face in education, particularly those who, like me, have taught exclusively low-income children and children of color, which is that content-rich curricula holds a lot of promise, but it just needs to be researched in depth. Very, very few published curricula in the United States would qualify as content-rich. This is surprising, frankly a little troubling to me. I mean, I will admit publicly that I'm a disciple of E.D. Hirsch Jr., who wrote Cultural Literacy in the Schools We Need and other books. His work described what I saw in my South Bronx classroom every day, children who could decode. And by way of context, I taught for several years in literally the lowest performing school in the lowest performing district in the city of New York. I didn't have one child in all that time who could not decode. What they could not do well was comprehend, and Hirsch's work accurately, and to my mind, described what I was seeing. Because we were giving them precious little history, geography, art, music, etc. And when you do that, you're not making children's literacy better, you're actually doing damage. So if you've read Hirsch's work, if you've seen Dan Willingham present, then you know that the links between background knowledge and literacy are just not debatable, but it's surprising that more curriculum developers have not seized upon this and built their work around it. I don't need to preach this to a DI audience, clearly. The next big finding we've already discussed and had a little sport with it, which is, despite these findings, most instructional materials are still being are the result of selection or creation by individual teachers. And by the way, this was not just the RAND report that revealed this. Thomas Kane at Harvard did a similar study, found that the use of self-created materials, that's 80% of ELA teachers, 72% of mathematics teachers reporting using materials developed by themselves or staff at their schools on a weekly basis. And look, let's be clear, maybe it's great. Maybe the do-it-yourself stuff over the kitchen sink is really quite good. It's unlikely because, again, we haven't had the training in instructional design, but it's impossible to study. The last point really underscores my point about education's just general indifference to curriculum. Think about this. If your child gets a prescription for some malady, my guess is you know everything there is to know about. You know the drug, you know its effectiveness, you know what side effects to watch out for, you know the pluses or minuses versus other competing drugs. How many of us know anything at all about the curriculum in our children's school? Do you know the literacy curriculum in your child's school? Do you know the math curriculum? Or how many of our parents, as professionals, hopefully we are a little bit savvier than the average bear, but most parents probably have no idea what their kids are doing all day. So it's great that we're getting more curious about curriculum, but we have a lot to learn, not just about what curricula are better, but the features, again, that makes it better. This was the conclusion to our research report, that curriculum is deeply important, and therefore a teacher or school or district's choice of curriculum can make a substantial impact on their students' learning. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was optimistic that we're seeing traction for curriculum as a reform lever. Let me quickly mention why, and the timing is propitious here. I literally have a piece in Education Next this morning that came out about a fascinating statewide curriculum initiative in the state of Louisiana. Anybody here from Louisiana? Nobody. In 2016, about a year and a half ago, researchers again at the RAND Corporation set out to study Common Core implementation at the state level. They found something fascinating. They used data from something called the American Teacher Panel, which is a nationwide sample of about 3,000 teachers, and they noticed what they called large and intriguing differences between Louisiana teachers and those in other states. Now, this is interesting because usually when you hear Louisiana, the number 49 or 48 is right behind it. So I can only say that joke because there's nobody here from Louisiana. So I was just curious, why is it that Louisiana, of all places, seemed like their teachers got Common Core better, and were using instructional techniques, according to the survey, that were what the standards intended. What the hell was going on in Louisiana? So I went there to find out. And it turns out they've instituted a series of statewide curriculum initiatives. Now, Louisiana is a strong local control state. They're not imposing anything on anyone, but they've gone through this interesting tiering process where they vet curriculum, and then they give incentives to districts all across the state to adopt it. Then they align professional development to that curriculum, and the assessment is actually mirabile dictu based on what gets taught. Again, common sense to us, but this is rocket science for folks in the policy world. And it seems to be working. Louisiana's fourth graders, this is the data point, posted the highest growth among all states on the 2015 National Assessment of Progress. Highest growth, not highest proficiency, on the reading test, and the second highest in the nation on fourth grade math. And interestingly, other states are paying attention. There's an organization in Washington called the Council of Chief State School Officers, which has put together a study group of 10 other states, which is now looking at what Louisiana has done with an eye towards possibly replicating it. So in other words, states are looking at this and saying, hey, curriculum matters. Maybe we should pay attention to this, which is bracing. So it's great that the policy world is starting to pry open the black box. That's very encouraging. But look, we teachers obviously do not have the time to wait for the research or for policymakers to come down with stone tablets and say, thou shalt teach this. We have to decide right now what we're going to do with the children in our room. So let me talk a little bit about curriculum from our perspective. I think the biggest challenge that we face as teachers right now is the culture of American education valorizes skills over content. Another hard lesson I learned in the South Bronx. Virtually every big picture goal that we have, that we talk about for education, reading comprehension, problem solving, critical thinking, communication, 21st century skills, we mistakenly conceive of these as skills like riding a bike or throwing a ball. They're simply not so. Each of these are what a cognitive scientist would call domain specific. In other words, you have to know about architecture, for example, to think critically about architecture. Steven Spielberg, for example, could not manage the New York Yankees. We know he's a creative genius, but he's a creative genius filmmaker. There's no reason to think that he would be any more successful than you or I, if we're a baseball fan, in managing the Yankees. These skills, these cognitive skills, don't transfer from one domain to the next. I'm also concerned that assessment and accountability conspires against investment in vocabulary and knowledge. Most of our state standards and state assessments tend to be skills driven, so naturally most of our curriculum, especially in ELA, focuses on skills rather than content. There's also this unholy alliance, if you like, between constructivism and education technology. Things like the School of One approach, which thrives on skill building and a la carte content, All of these things, I think, conspire against what we should hope for as teachers, which is this steady, patient investment in coherent knowledge building that's desperately needed by the kind of kids that I taught, and I assume most of you do as well. So if you were to give me a magic wand that I could fix any one thing in education, it would be to wish that every child that we teach leaves us with a big vocabulary, and I'm going to explain why. It's a convenient proxy for a whole range of educational attainments. If you've got a large vocabulary, you're competent in reading and writing. That correlates with SAT success. That predicts the likelihood that you'll go to college, graduate, be upwardly mobile, etc. The wage benefit that comes with all of that. So how can we ensure that children get or leave us with a big vocabulary? Irony alert, it's not merely by teaching vocabulary. There's a term which perhaps you've heard of, called the Matthew effect. It was coined, I believe, by Keith Stanovich, a cognitive scientist at the University of Toronto, now retired. This term describes what happens when some kids come to our schools with smaller vocabularies, less general knowledge than their peers. The name comes from a passage in the New Testament Gospel of Matthew, hence the name, "For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance, but from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath." Which in plain English means what? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. So when it comes to language and vocabulary growth, the Matthew effect means that those who come to us language rich tend to get language richer. Those who come to us language poor get language poorer. Why? Well, because knowledge builds on knowledge, language builds on language, words build on words. Think about this for a second. How do we learn new words? Not merely by studying vocabulary. A typical college freshman, let's do some math, comes to freshman year of college with a working vocabulary, depending on how you count, of about 60,000 words. So to learn that many words by age 18 would require, quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, that you learn 10 words a day, 70 words a week, 3,300 words a year, and by the way, that assumes you're learning your first 10 words in the delivery room. And 10 more every day until freshman year. Clearly, nobody does that. So where does all this language growth come from? Let me do a quick demonstration. Because we're all excellent decoders, we can all read this word, right? Anybody? Excrescence. I like this word because very few people actually know what it means. But if you don't know this word and you were to guess, what would you guess this word means? I heard somebody say excrete, like maybe that has something to do with excretion. Okay, maybe I'll give you a sentence and tell me if this doesn't help. To calculate fuel efficiency, aerospace engineers needed an accurate estimation of excrescence drag caused by the shape of the plane's cabin. Now we all know what it means, right? Not yet? Okay, another sentence. Excrescences on the valve of the heart have been known to cause a stroke. So now perhaps you have a vague understanding of what the word excrescence means. I'm going to give you another sentence so now you can check your understanding against this new sentence. The wart, a small excrescence on his skin, had made Jeremy self-conscious for years. Okay, by now I'm seeing a few nods. You probably have a pretty solid understanding of the word. One more sentence will confirm your understanding. At the far end of the meadow was what at first glance I thought a huge dome building and then saw was an excrescence from the cliff itself. Okay, you probably figured out, if you didn't already know, that excrescence, I think I've got the definition here, it means a projection or an outgrowth, especially an abnormal one. Okay, so that's an accelerated example of how language growth and word development occurs. You get a general sense from repeated exposures, possibilities and probabilities get narrowed down until you kind of own that word. But hold on a second, okay? Think of all the words and knowledge that you already had that enabled you to learn that new word, excrescence. You knew about engineers, strokes, and warts. You didn't have to stop and wonder what efficiency and aerospace meant, what it means to be self-conscious. You are already rich in knowledge and vocabulary, and you just got a little richer. Now, if you didn't have that background knowledge, if you didn't know all those things, we all learned a new word, you did not. Okay, that's the Matthew effect. This is how language functions. I didn't take the time to explain aerospace engineers, how the heart works, meadows and cliffs, etc. I just assumed that you knew, and of course, we all knew. You got the general gist of what I was talking about. The gist is the secret sauce. The gist is where the magic of language growth occurs. If you don't have the gist of what I'm talking about, your understanding is vague, your ability to learn new words, to gain new knowledge is vague, and as I sometimes joke, what happens in vagueness stays in vagueness. This is a profoundly important insight, my joke notwithstanding. It gets to the heart of our struggle to improve reading comprehension, especially for low-income kids. If we don't teach kids, especially low-income kids, geography and art and music, if we don't arm them with the mental furniture that we all have, that dreaded Matthew effect takes hold and doesn't let go. Let me, in closing, make one last argument for curriculum and for shared knowledge. And this one, I promise you, will have nothing to do with research, with literacy, with vocabulary development, or test scores, but it has everything to do with understanding. It has to do with history and civics, with American citizenship, with simple fairness, and the reason so many of us, I think, became teachers in the first place. I want to take you back to January 20th, 2009. That was the day that Barack Obama took the oath of office as the 44th President of the United States. On that day, I saw this quote in the Los Angeles Times. This teacher said, "It's an amazing event for our students." She said, "They see Obama and they say, 'This is a president who looks like me. I can be president.'" Now, let me be clear. That is absolutely true and earnest and heartfelt and touching. Deeply meaningful. I don't want to diminish that in any way, shape, or form, because it was an important day to so many Americans. But I was bothered that day, and I'm bothered still today, because the president's inaugural address was rich in history, in biblical allusions, in literary analogies that were almost certainly lost upon most Americans and just about all of our students. Let's listen to a minute of it.
We remain a young nation, but in the words of Scripture, the time has come to set aside childish things. The time has come to reaffirm our enduring spirit, to choose our better history, to carry forward that precious gift, that noble idea passed on from generation to generation, the God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. In reaffirming the greatness of our nation, we understand that greatness is never a given. It must be earned. Our journey has never been one of shortcuts or settling for less. It has not been the path for the faint-hearted, for those who prefer leisure over work or seek only the pleasures of riches and fame. Rather, it has been the risk-takers, the doers, the makers of things, some celebrated, but more often men and women obscure in their labor, who have carried us up the long, rugged path towards prosperity and freedom. For us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip, and plowed the hard earth. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord and Gettysburg, Normandy, and Quezon. Time and again, these men and women struggled and sacrificed and worked till their hands were raw so that we might live a better life. They saw America as bigger than the sum of our individual ambitions, greater than all the differences of birth or wealth or faction. This is the journey we continue today.
Think about what he just said. Think about the amount of background knowledge that is required to fully, viscerally understand what President Obama was just talking about. He said, for us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip, plowed the hard earth. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord and Gettysburg, Normandy, and Quezon. To have endured, and I think that's the right verb, to have endured a content-free education where history was a second-tier subject, where shared knowledge didn't matter, was to be left to wonder, who are these people he's talking about, who toiled for us in sweatshops and settled the West? Who are these people who endured the lash of the whip and plowed the hard earth? If you don't know our nation's rich history, then the president's description of those who packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life almost certainly failed to move you. If you cannot find Concord, Gettysburg, Normandy, Quai San on a map, if you don't know what happened in those places, then the sacrifices of the people who fought and died for us in those places is lost upon you. If our children are ignorant of that history, then I think it's sad to say, but then some measure of that sacrifice is, alas, in vain. So two very different groups of Americans watched that speech that day. There were those of us who understood the deep historical significance, not just of the moment, but of the words, all of the words. That we knew the references, the allusions. We grasped fully the moment in history to which we were bearing witness. But what about our children? What about our students? What did they see? Novelty, a first, nothing more. And again, that's okay, but it's not enough. So elsewhere in the speech, Obama talked about the rights of man are common defense of American ideals that light the world. Common phrases to those of us who've had a history in civic education. He praised the generation that faced down communism and fascism. We are the keepers of this legacy, he said. He spoke of the price and promise of citizenship. We have, he said, quote, duties to our nation, ourselves, and the world, duties that we do not begrudgingly accept, but rather seize gladly. Well, is that true? Are we the keepers of this legacy? Are we really? If the price and promise of citizenship is lost upon our children, if they're ignorant of our civic ideals, then how could they possibly appreciate this moment? I think of my former students in the South Bronx. Could they even begin to grasp what this president who looks like them, was asking them to do? How is it possible to be the keeper of this legacy? Why should you value and seek to keep it at all unless you understand viscerally what is being asked of you? So in closing, think of the extraordinary historical closing of a loop that happened at this moment. And you may know this. So on January 20th, 2009, an African-American man takes the oath of office with his hand on a Bible. Does anybody know whose Bible it was? Lincoln. Right? Who signed what? The Emancipation Proclamation. And in a remarkable moment, Obama, when he gives his speech, he is turning and he's facing exactly this spot where in 1967, if I'm not mistaken, Martin Luther King delivered the I Have a Dream speech, and you probably remember the words. When King wished that one day that his children be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So the new president turns, he delivers his inaugural address to millions of Americans who had rendered exactly that judgment. Wonderful. And a teachable moment. Not for kids, a teachable moment for us. If we don't share the same history, if we don't impart that history, the ideals, the events, the words that have shaped us as a nation, then we quite literally cannot understand each other. We see dimly, we understand only superficially, we see novelty. So why does this matter? Why does curriculum matter? So this doesn't happen again, so that in the very near future, our nation's children are able to judge each other not by the color of their skin, not even the content of their character, but by the weight of their words. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Very much appreciated. So that generally concludes our opening festivities. We'll start our sessions at 10 o'clock, so you've got about 15 minutes to stretch your legs, get yourself another cup of coffee, go to your sessions, work hard, practice, ask questions, enjoy yourselves. Have a great week, and we'll see you later.